People who have worked for the ultra-wealthy. What are some of their deepest, darkest secrets? Story 1. I worked in the wedding business for 8 years. After a while, I was able to sniff out ultra-wealthy clients during initial phone calls, emails, and always turned them down. Newly rich people have one objective: impress others. That's it. Nothing was ever good enough. Most wedding clients had timelines, which at most were broken into 30-minute blocks. I had one wealthy mother-in-law who had her timeline in 5-minute blocks. Yes, 5-minute blocks. After the wedding, she emailed me 6 pages of criticism, absolutely heartbroken that her daughter's golden hour sunset photos were delayed by 10 minutes because our champagne service was not efficient enough. I had one bride email me 6 months after her wedding to complain that we provided her a new staff member for her reception. Mind you, this person was extra labor. She was provided an extra server for free, as I always paid extensively for new hires to have on-the-job training before they were given real shifts. One rich bride was enraged that my employees put 2, and not 1, orange slices in her cocktail. By contrast, blue-collar people were almost always the nicest, laid-back, sincere, grateful, and high-tipping clients, with actual friends and family who had a wedding for all the right reasons. Old money people and self-made successful people, that is, people who worked construction then launched their own businesses, were night and day different from new money, who are complete douchebags obsessed with impressing the Joneses. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I had a very wealthy boss who really had no boundaries about 20 years ago. I worked at an art gallery and was paid literally peanuts. One night, after a big party, I ended up at his house with an agent from out of town. I was just PR babysitting. I discovered all he had in his house to eat was champagne, a block of Parmesan, and drugs. I left as soon as possible. He had me break up with women he invited up to his cabin for the weekend. One was a roquette who forgot her cell phone, and I had to prioritize FedEx it back to her. I also had his Chase Manhattan PIN numbers and dealt with his expenses. He's damn lucky I am an honest person, because I cannot stress to you enough, I was only 27. Story 3. I did a personal information technology service for an incredibly wealthy guy in Tucson. House overlooking the city from the foothills. 8 feet single-pane windows, etc. He had a ranch of at least 40,000 acres in Texas, and most of his dollars was from oil. His biggest secret was that he knew most people only liked him for his wealth, including his present wife, 2 kids, and 2 stepkids, and they'd cut ties in a heartbeat if it disappeared. Story 4. I worked at a place that sold very expensive watches and jewelry, which was frequented by the rich and famous. I would get in trouble sometimes because I didn't recognize them. Basketball players' wives, for example. These were specific types of rich people, the ones who wanted others to know exactly how rich they were. Furthermore, I learned that there are brands that cater specifically to these people and are mostly only recognized within their own circles. A lot of ultra-wealthy people don't dress up when they go out. They can be plain or even sloppy. It was important to never assume someone's status. They are petty and will throw you under the bus in a millisecond if it will even slightly benefit them. While I worked there, I was screamed at, had things thrown at me. I saw grown men throw huge tantrums. They do it because they know they will get something out of it. Your work had to be beyond perfection, because they would purposely try to find faults to exploit. I hated that their behavior was always rewarded. I preferred it when their assistants were the ones we helped. Many of them seem incredibly isolated and lonely. Some would come and talk politics at us because they had no one else who would listen. Though, to be honest, we weren't allowed to express any of our own thoughts, so it was pretty one-sided conversation. Story 5. I worked at a place that sold very expensive watches and jewelry, which was frequented by the rich and famous. I would get in trouble sometimes because I didn't recognize them. Basketball players' wives, for example. These were specific types of rich people, the ones who wanted others to know exactly how rich they were. Furthermore, I learned that there are brands that cater specifically to these people and are mostly only recognized within their own circles. A lot of ultra-wealthy people don't dress up when they go out. They can be plain or even sloppy. It was important to never assume someone's status. They are petty and will throw you under the bus in a millisecond if it will even slightly benefit them. While I worked there, I was screamed at, had things thrown at me. I saw grown men throw huge tantrums. They do it because they know they will get something out of it. Your work had to be beyond perfection, because they would purposely try to find faults to exploit. I hated that their behavior was always rewarded. I preferred it when their assistants were the ones we helped. Many of them seem incredibly isolated and lonely. Some would come and talk politics at us because they had no one else who would listen, though to be honest, we weren't allowed to express any of our own thoughts, so it was pretty one-sided conversation. Story 6. Worked in the tech investor/startup space. Ended up at the World Economic Forum in Davos one year. I remember eating a $32 hamburger, listening to a man brag about influencing elections in developing nations to support his commercial interests. He spoke so casually, like he was sharing old college stories. He shared the missteps he had made in his political schemes that had caused civil wars, and lamented on the tens of thousands of lives that his errors had indirectly taken. Drunk at a bar on a mountain, he talked through literal crimes with the tone of someone who had freaked up at their day job. I remember that he believed it was his duty to influence, that whatever underlying meritocracy granted him enough power to buy elections also required him to guide the poor, silly populations underneath him. He left me with the check for his beer. Story 7. He was divorced and married to a second wife. He never divorced, and the second wife is a mistress that he parades around as his wife. The actual wife doesn't give a crap as long as they're still rich, but won't let his second batch of kids inherit their joint assets. So he had to buy his second wife some income properties for security. She'll be okay though. He bought her $100 million worth of income properties. Story 8. I got upgraded recently by a very kind hotel staff member and got to stay at the hotel's exclusive floor. The rooms were really nice, but it was all the extra stuff. Exclusive lounge with free canapes, a selection of custom scents for your room, and a lovely dedicated concierge who seemed deeply confused. I didn't need him to do anything for me. Later, I was sitting in that lounge, and a woman walked up to the concierge, gave him a piece of paper with her measurements on it, and asked him to have some workout clothes shoes sent up to her room so she could use the gym. As if they just have a magical chamber downstairs with everyone's exact size of shoes and clothes sitting there. She seemed perplexed when he explained they didn't, and suggested a Lululemon store a few blocks away. She then said, "Excellent. Send someone over to pick some things up. I prefer earth tones. Just charge it to my room." She didn't even wait for a reply before walking away. It's mind-blowing. They are just used to getting everything they need, all the time. At a moment's notice, they are utterly dumbfounded when they hear the word no. Story 9. I worked as a PA for a billionaire. He was delusional, but his wife was something else. She would have breakdowns, screaming and crying in her glass office so the whole floor could see and hear her. It could be over something as simple as her lunch being late or wrong. Luckily, I was not her PA. She went through a few of them quickly. One time, she was supposed to speak at a company event, and it was raining. I was told we pushed her slot to avoid the rain, so I called her hairdresser, who was doing her hair at a rented mansion. She still showed up at the original time and had an absolute meltdown about the rain, the mud, and her slot being pushed. My boss was pissed at me and didn't want to hear any excuses about me calling ahead. He just took it and said sorry. Told me sorry is for losers. Okay, bro. There's a show and documentary about them, which gives a glimpse into who they are. Gave me post-traumatic stress disorder watching them. Story 10. I did a week worth of work on the ranch of the guy who invented the vibrating toy. The man was loaded. He had a giant house with a Spanish fountain out front, a spa/gym/office with a huge Roman-style pool and statuary, an attached walled garden with a stone Buddha statue and an Indian tiger tower, a massive barn, and his own disco/club. It was quite the compound. His dark secret was that he was kinda boring and down to earth for what he's famous for. Every day he'd drive a United Television around and look at the birds. His wife was quite nice too, though maybe a little out of touch. She complained about how hard it was to buy legitimate antiques, the aforementioned statues, etc., because countries were cracking down on exporting cultural relics. They treated me well. I would come around to check and see if I had enough water. Would come chat with me for a bit each day. Honestly, pretty nice people. Story 11. I worked for 3-4 billionaires, was in construction management and did multi-year remodels of some homes and some new builds. I've been on their jets, yachts, visited 3 of their 9 homes, drove their cars, helped move Picassos across the 30,000 square feet house, you name it. My biggest takeaways are 1. That many of them have no real understanding how the real world works, and 2. It's often a lonely, fearful, and sad life. They stress over who is trying to take advantage of them. My wealthiest client ever drove a Prius because she was afraid of being targeted. They paid to have 24/7 security at the house because they fear and live in paranoia. Their kids have nothing to aspire to, no dreams, and any accomplishments are mere expectations. I got out of it, because the stress was unbearable when pulling a rabbit out of your buns becomes what you're known for and the expectations are that you will always be able to do that. They throw money at your bosses and your boss agrees to the impossible and then you have to get it done. Story 12. Had to entertain an oligarch for an afternoon once, but had no idea he was a legit oligarch who would destroy the world's amounts of wealth. The only secret I gleaned was you never know who somebody is. He dressed, acted, and enjoyed in all the ways a normal person on a budget would. I didn't get the impression that it was an act for me, but he definitely appreciated that I didn't know or give a freak who he was. I took him to a dive bar and for tacos after. My boss said the oligarch reported a great time and made sure I got the recognition. Story 13. They are unusually cheap, or most I've worked for are. I am in wine sales and cellar management, and I had a client who had over $10 million in first growth Bordeaux and Grand Cru Burgundy, and he served $20 Pinot and Bubbles Cava at his Xmas party for his best friends and celebrities. He died in a $10 million cellar. Story 14. Changed out some home security stuff for a very wealthy older couple, like 10 billion plus. The wife was incredibly kind, and if encountered in the wild she would be totally normal appearing. It was the little things in their home that blew me away, handcrafted everything. They even sent me and my guys home with a bunch of stuff from their garden. Story 15. I used to be close friends with a kid who was best friends with a kid a little younger whose mom's family was probably worth $5 billion. We would go over to his house and do whatever activity you could dream of. It was there. Every single night there were stereo pans with dinner from one of the local high-end restaurants. If a chef didn't come in and make something, we would take the family jet to his apartment in a large city every couple of months, limo to hangar, get on, lay out food on flight, limo directly off plane and to apartment. One time his drug dealer in the city was out of town, so he asked me to bring an ounce for him back when it was $400/Oz for high-end. I had made the flight before, so I knew security was no issue, but as a 20-year-old kid guessing that was a huge expense, I felt awful bringing it up after everything we didn't pay for.
And I did smoke, but not at his rate.
We always sat courtside at basketball games, went to a club afterward and spent worth of $25,000, ate at the best places, etc. So I just ate it. We were in the limo back to the plane after that weekend and he was freaking around with his bag and pulled out $1,000 in an envelope and was like, "My bad man, I totally forgot to get you this." He was a young dude, kind, soft-spoken, haven't seen him in probably 15 years. Story 16. My dad cleans houses, ranging from the tiniest studio apartment to houses with their own security guard and driveway in SoCal. The biggest houses, the cheapest, and most judgmental people. I once went to a house where their master closet was bigger than our house, 1,800 square feet. The owner was the nastiest person I've ever met. Middle-class people were the best. They always tipped and gave free food to my parents. Story 17. I don't know if it's a deep secret, but they did seem to hide the reality from the image. They seemed like a stand-up family guy who'd created an empire from nothing. Their child offed themselves on Father's Day. And it was a clear statement of why they were doing it on that day from people who were close enough. But the death was very much hidden and written off as an accident and portrayed as something other than what it was. It wasn't an accident. It was a tortured soul's last outcry to their horrible, abusive father who was a piece of crap as an employer. So I can only imagine the horror he was as a parent. They chose that day to end their lives, and even though I was a child when it happened, I remember realizing how much the day they chose was impactful in the grim circumstances. Story 18. This is 50 years ago. I worked for dozens of the wealthiest, think 100 million and up crowd. Very consistently joyless, entitled, arrogant, and cheap, often overlaid with substance abuse issues, with notable exceptions. One of the richest multiple billionaires would occasionally come out and work with me. I was doing landscaping, maintenance, whatever. He asked me to help plant some strawberries, worked with me the whole time, and described high finance, how to shift risk to the other guy while retaining control and the lion's share of the profit. Easy going, super nice guy. Story 19. The more money they have, the more problems they create to avoid paying you. Sign a contract, secure a guarantee with clawbacks, and wait. Rich people are rich because they prefer not to spend money and they know they can out-litigate the little guy to avoid paying. Cover your behind. Money means nothing if you don't get it up front. The wealthier they are, the more you should protect yourself in advance. Billionaire client? Do 70% up front and 30% on the back end. Know who they trust to sign off, so if they're off jet-setting and unavailable, you can go to that guy. Best advice I can give. Story 20. I didn't work for the ultra-wealthy, but my mother, who was extremely beautiful but not wealthy, grew up as a socialite, the kind who was a debutante and was supposed to marry an ultra-wealthy man. Instead, she married my dad, who was a struggling artist. But one of her best friends came to visit our humble home when I was 12 years old in 1992. She was an heiress to a huge fortune, and she had just come from Paris where she had seen the Calvin Klein runway show. She had liked the clothes so much that she bought the entire collection. However, since it was literally the pieces worn by the models instead of off the rack, they didn't really fit the way they should, and sometimes her shirt just fell off. Luckily for her, she had just gotten a new chest job and was happy to show it off. She was on a lot of prescription pills and drank alcohol from dawn to dusk and also chain-smoked. We didn't have a guest room, so she shared my bed. She would periodically wake up, take pills, and smoke, burning holes in my comforter. One night she suddenly screamed in her sleep, "You better get that wuss out of my house or I am calling the cops." 12-year-old me thought she was fascinating and hilarious. The night she woke me up screaming and cursing, I got out of bed and went into the living room to find my father watching the LA riots on television because he said, "It's a lot more peaceful than what's going on here." Story 21. I have flown private jets for various wealthy individuals. People you would likely never know. They don't exist in the public sphere in the way someone like Bezos does. They don't always have some deep, dark thing that is unique to wealth. They're human. And the things, the emotions, the tendencies they exhibit are the same across the entire human spectrum. I've come away seeing wealth just makes you more of what you are. If you're mean, you're more mean. If you're nice, you're more nice. They still have problems, and some of that is tied to their wealth, which is family drama, having access to the wealth, and raising children to be humble or entitled. They are more insulated from legal or political consequences. Story 22. Worked for them? No, but I worked for a high-end furniture store and delivered furniture to them for years when I was young. Most of them tried to squeeze as much as they could out of you while paying as little as possible. So many times, we'd show up with furniture and they'd expect us to move their entire house around like we were United Van Lines. If we refused, they'd call the manager and threaten to reject the delivery or leave a bad review. Eventually, the manager had to make it clear to all customers we were a delivery service, not a move-your-stuff-around service. Once that was solved, they'd try to bribe us with tips. A few times, when we were broke, we agreed. Then they'd either forget and hope we wouldn't say anything, or they'd come up with some lousy excuse to not tip us. Yeah, when you carried that 300-pound armoire down to the basement, the third step is creaking now. It didn't do that before. We're going to have to use that tip money to contribute to the carpenter who's going to fix that step. Then, when we'd give them the bill, they'd act like we were asking for a small kidney, carrying on about the price like we were stealing from them, as if they didn't already know exactly how much it cost when they ordered it. I frigging hate rich people. I know some of them are okay, but based on my experiences, I'd say a good 90% of them are the cheapest, most entitled, powerful a-holes I've had the misfortune of dealing with. Story 23. I haven't worked for any, but my stepfather is one. I remember one instance where he was planning a flight, and his plane needed maintenance before it could fly. Instead of waiting the couple of weeks or so for it to be fixed, he just bought another plane. He believes that money can solve everything, which, unsurprisingly, it does not. He has this idea that he can just pay people to either shut up or ignore problems. That includes family. He constantly argues with my mom, often completely ignoring the actual issue and giving her some extravagant gift, thinking that will make everything better. It usually doesn't. His kids are completely messed up. They spent their entire lives never being told no. Now, as they're becoming adults, they've been metaphorically slapped in the face by the fact that most people actually have to work for a living. They don't even grasp the concept. The whole thing about having assets in different countries and hiding transactions under the guise of charity is completely true. I don't think he does it out of malice, but purely because he believes his only worth is his money. In reality, he's a genuinely kind person, but he sees all relationships as transactions. I often feel sad for him when I hear from family members about how he sweeps real problems under the rug and tries to cover them up with money because he truly believes that's the only solution. It's also quite sad to see how much of life you miss when you feel like you can go anywhere without needing protection. We come from a third world country where the wealthy are easily identified and often targeted, so there's always this constant need to hide either yourself or your money. Just as an example, my stepfather's mother, my step-grandma, I guess, hasn't left the gated property she lives on in maybe 5 years. She's afraid that if she goes out in public, she'll be kidnapped for ransom or something similar. She lives about a 45-minute drive from one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and she's never gone to see it. And she's so lonely. She even has a hired staff member specifically to keep her company, as in someone is literally paid to hang out with her, because she's lonely and doesn't know how to make friends who aren't just in it for the money. Money does solve a lot of problems, but it also gets to a point where it creates them. Story 24. I worked as an architectural designer for the incredibly rich. It was the least fulfilling position I've ever had. Most of the builds were fifth vacation homes that only their lawyers ever used. I was told it gave them a tax break, though I still have no idea how. I had total design freedom in most cases, which is every designer's dream. I once did a Japanese Hawaiian 50s surf theme in a kitchen, complete with a vintage surfboard as the bar top. But after a while, I started calling these places palaces of dust because no one ever used them. Many of the homes were on a private ranch the firm managed, and the maintenance tasks were depressing to witness. It was painfully obvious the properties were unused, and they were gorgeous. The very few clients who got personally involved were the reason I left high-end design. They'd walk all over boundaries, like calling in the middle of the night to say they'd changed their mind and wanted the kitchen window put back in its original pre-build position. But the worst situation ended in 2 deaths. It was winter in a place where that really means something. This build was nearing completion when the owner flew in unannounced. On the same day, the home theater was scheduled to be installed. The installers were coming from what would be a 45-minute drive in the summer, but in winter, it was what the locals called the suicide road because of the ice. The theater company had tried to cancel due to the weather. I was told to call and let them know the owner was in town and they'd have to make it anyway. I refused. A 20-year-old drafting assistant was given the task instead. She called, and they agreed to send their guys. 20 minutes later, I was told again to make the call. This time I did, hoping they'd change their minds. Instead, I was given their cell numbers. I refused to call the installers in the car because I knew by that point they would be driving through a canyon with black ice, right next to a river with no guardrail. The assistant called them. They were on their way, but she told them the owner was waiting. Then another architectural designer called. Then the assistant called again. I asked them not to, but the impatient owner overruled everything. Then they stopped answering. They had hit a patch of black ice and careened into a ditch and a light pole. Speed was a factor. Both men had families with young children. Neither the architectural firm nor the home theater company ever mentioned the phone calls to anyone. As for the owner, he was annoyed at the delay. Story 25. One of my best friends in my teens was the son of the one-time richest man in the region. They were completely normal, aside from their house's interior. There were at least a dozen other houses in their neighborhood that were better than theirs. It was quaint by today's country club standards, but absolutely everything inside was the best available commercial-size Sub-Zero refrigerators, disguised as cabinetry, high-flush toilets that were completely silent, and a wired smart house, at least as much as that existed in 1990, which is more than you'd think. Subtle touches, understated wealth, lots of accessory-type bland original art, like Audubon prints or landscapes. Mom drove a station wagon, and Dad a Buick. They were generous and kind. They raised their kids to be accountable and to treat people right. Dad was self-made. Mom was second-generation wealth. The actual billionaire I worked for was super cool. Self-made. I had monthly meetings with him and about 16 others, and seeing his ability to connect with everyone from hourly workers to senior executives was impressive. Story 26. Not me, but my parents. They went to school with a girl from a poor farm family who became rich after high school. The girl and her roommate were in college when they created the first storyline for a very popular video game. She went on to earn a computer science degree along with the royalties from selling that storyline. She worked for the company that purchased it for a while, then decided to retire early. My parents stayed in touch with her occasionally but hadn't seen her in many years, until very recently when her mother died from cancer. The last time she spoke to my mom, she said the girl had become very lonely after several failed relationships. She fell into a deep depression and used some of her money to basically shelter herself away from others. When my parents reconnected with her at her mother's funeral, they said she looked very aged and worn out, like she hadn't slept in years. It turned out she was on various depression and anxiety medications that weren't working well, and she had stayed awake for over 48 hours before the funeral. Her father said she was losing weight fast and told my parents the money changed her. It was clear she lives one day at a time, hoping the day will end quickly so she can finally go to bed. It broke my parents' hearts to know that even after becoming successful, she still struggles with insecurities and mental health issues. Story 27. They are painfully detached from regular struggles and genuinely believe their success comes purely from merit, even when born into extreme wealth. And if they do earn it, they refuse to accept that luck played any role. They fundamentally can't understand the word no. So you have to explain things in a way that lets them think they're right. For example, when they try to break specific rules, you often have to say, I will make sure to share your suggestions, so hopefully we can change that rule in the future. Also, no one loves free stuff more than rich people. Story 28. I have a neighbor. We're both 78 years old. When he was about 19 or 20, he worked as a handyman for Jackie Onassis around her horse ranch in New York. He once assembled a motorcycle for her son John that had been shipped in from Italy. He said she was the nicest person you could imagine. She even cooked him breakfast a couple of times when he was all sweaty from doing early morning chores. Story 29. They can actually be quite cheap when nobody is looking. Penny pinching is pretty common. They'll use the lowest bidders for things like cleaning and lawn service, then stiff people on payment over minor disputes. They're also poor tippers when no one's around. I went out to dinner with a wealthy friend. The table order was quite expensive, but she only left $5 as a tip. She slid it quickly under a napkin so nobody could see how little she left. Now, if she'd been with her other wealthy friends, I am sure the tip would have been much larger. That same friend once bought me a drink while we were out, a soda, not an alcoholic beverage. It was $1.50, no big deal for someone with a bank account bursting at the seams. When we got back to her place, she asked me to repay her because she was nearing her budget for the week on snacks and stuff. I gave her 2 bills, and she kept the change. Story 30. I have provided construction services and NDAs were always in place. Almost all the clients were lonely, and their wives were unhappy. The children had nannies and were well cared for, and the men all had personal assistants. One thing I've recently noticed: the wealthy love pickleball, the sport. I've eaten and drank with these people, and it's fascinating. Oh, and the women love online shopping. There were deliveries every single day. Helicopters are a big deal too, especially the A-Star. If any women are reading this, I've never seen so many high-end women's shoes in my life. Hundreds of pairs in dedicated closets. Sorry, I am rambling. I think I have sunstroke. Story 31. I design home bathrooms and kitchens. I hate going to mansions of the mega-rich. They're the cheapest, most annoying people, and they don't respect your time. It takes hours to design a bathroom or kitchen. The middle class gets excited and usually wants to move forward. They'll get financing or whatever. But these rich pricks? They're the worst. I just left an $8 million lake house. It took 2 hours to get there. The guy told me not to waste his time and to give him a ballpark figure for the cheapest bathroom. I said $15,000, and he laughed it off, saying it was out of his budget. Story 32. I had a friend who was an heiress to a family name you'd all know. She was a granddaughter, not a daughter, so her wealth wasn't as great, but she was beyond comfortable. We went out for drinks one night, and I didn't have much money on me, so she spotted me a couple of rounds. The next day I went over to repay her the $20 she'd spent on me. She actually got emotional and said nobody has ever paid me back before. They all assume she can afford it. This was in the 1980s and I was making crap money as a secretary, but I actually felt sorry for her. Story 33. I was an electrician and worked at the home of a very famous pro wrestler. We were adding a bathroom to the guest house on his property. The bathroom in that guest house was 1,200 square feet, just to give you an idea of how insanely rich this guy is. The main house was basically a castle, easily 30,000 square feet. They had 6 Great Danes that would crap all over the place, and they just let the giant piles of dog waste sit on the marble floors of their over-the-top mansion until the cleaners came every day to clean it up. They're not the only wealthy people I've known who were like this. They're pigs. They'll live in their own filth until whoever they pay to clean up after them shows up and rescues them. Story 34. I worked as an assistant to billionaires, one family in the Middle East, and a single man in London. They used private jets to move furniture and art. Generally, both preferred first-class commercial travel for long hauls. Even the nannies traveled first class. You're in a special club if you're one of 100 Emirates airline customers. The perks are huge. The personal staff headcount was massive. Each property would have 4 to 8 live-in staff members. Add in drivers, assistants, and others, and personal staff easily reached 30 or more. It wasn't uncommon for a husband and wife duo to co-manage a property. We had a book of credit cards for purchases in different currencies. You can never say no to these people. That's been consistent with the ultra-wealthy. The man in London had 2 women, each with a child by him. Both had beautiful large townhouses with full staff, everything set up for them. One woman's spending account would hover around 300,000 Great British pounds. It was our job to keep it at that level. She was so lazy she'd send her children's iPads to the office for me to download games on. Discounts were still expected frequently, but other times money was no object. We would sometimes send housekeepers on commercial flights if we needed something moved very quickly. Moving expensive art is a total pain. You have to insure it before taking it off the wall and transporting it. Story 35. Nothing dark. I worked a few landscape construction and carpentry jobs for a dude who made a ton of money with an invention or modification to one and then married a lady from a family that already had some but nowhere near as much money. He was a regular dude. If we suggested something that would achieve the same result but cost less, he was grateful. He tipped well. He'd bring us cold drinks and ask about our families and stuff. His wife, on the other hand, spent like there was no tomorrow. We literally redid the entire back garden area, more than an acre, in April, because she was hosting a summer party. Tens of thousands of dollars in landscaping and landscape construction. In August, she had us tear it all out, and something totally different, because she was hosting a fall party and they can't just come back to the same old garden. She never tipped, ever. After he'd agreed to some cost-saving measure, she'd come behind us and demand we do it in a more expensive way. If we said her husband told us not to, she'd say, "You leave him to me." He treated everyone he interacted with like an equal. She treated everyone like they were helping if she acknowledged anyone at all. One interesting thing was that her dad lived with them. He was an old man from Sicily who spoke no English and had a little garden that he tended every day. We communicated through a few words of Italian and a lot of grins and hand gestures. From what I gathered, he loved his garden, he really liked his son-in-law, and he was embarrassed by his daughter. Story 36. My GPA worked for one of the 5 richest families in the state. He saved up forever to buy something for his baby daughter at a nice store only to be turned away on account of his race and the assumption he couldn't afford anything. He was disappointed but continued on with his day. His boss saw he was not his normal self and asked what happened. GPA didn't want to say as it was not relevant to his job, but the boss was persistent. GPA finally admitted what happened and that he was a bit disappointed. Unknown to GPA boss went to store and said he understood that someone tried to purchase there but was declined on the understanding that their money, obviously because of race, was not good enough. The boss said since he was the one who paid that person, he understands his money is not good enough, and would let all his rich friends know that their money was no good at that store. The store closed and did a private sale for my GPA to buy the dress he wanted for his only baby girl. Story 37. My mom was a primary teacher at a European school where millionaires from around the world send their kids. She was trying to teach the children to be considerate of the cleaning staff and not throw trash on the ground. The kids would reply, "But my parents told me that making a mess is how we give these people jobs." Eventually, the parents started complaining that the mean teacher wouldn't let their kids make a mess. Another time, my mom and the principal called the parents of a child with learning disabilities to discuss what kind of job the child might be capable of in the future. My mom blew a gasket at the insinuation that any child of theirs would have to work a day in their life. Story 38. When you are rich, you don't have to impress anyone. Years ago, the Grateful Dead toured through my little city with 2 concerts. The business impact analysis gave businesses a monthly event calendar, so we expected a bump. Concerts usually did that for my parents' restaurant, which was pretty nice. No jackets required, but nothing torn or ripped, please. We got people from across the border and outlying cities, so we were prepared. Those 2 concert days? We had the scruffiest patchouli oil smelling, old sandal smacking, tie-dyed t-shirt crowd I had ever seen come in for early dinner, filling the dining room. We skipped the dress code. They were by far the nicest and most polite crowd we had for a concert date. We never ran that many gold and platinum American Express cards through the machine on a midweek day before, and they tipped like crazy. The cool thing? A good 1 in 10 had a doctor title on the card. Story 39. Back in the day, I worked on an estate for a celebrity couple. Neurotic is an understatement. Phone calls at 4 a.m. saying I needed to go buy organic lavender oil because she couldn't sleep. An 8-hour round trip to deliver a bacon sandwich cooked by his own chef because he didn't like the on-site catering. He was married to arguably one of the most beautiful women to have ever lived, had an awesome job, was a multi-millionaire, and was miserable as hell. The second estate had an old money husband. He had the title and the land, but was cash poor. The wife had new money, or would have it when she inherited from her father. The difference in how they dealt with money was unbelievable. She was spending too much, and when the accountant told her to reel it in, she fired the accountant. She expected me to sail her yacht on weekends with no overtime. Because it's fun, I could go on for days. Story 40. As you grasp the theme of most stories here, keep in mind that the executive branch of the U.S. government is run by billionaires and high-net-worth individuals. The cabinet and advisors, many lacking experience in the fields they govern. They have no emotional ownership of the millions of people negatively affected by their cuts. Congress is pressured to assimilate or be ousted. The judiciary is stacked. It's human greed and survival. When the White House states that Medicaid will be strengthened by the current bill, what's not said is that the strength comes from changing qualifications, which reduces the number of people helped. The same goes for the federal premium credit for health insurance purchased through the exchange. This administration, which supposedly works for the people, really cannot relate to 98% of Americans. Story 41. My boss got mad at people offering him free money. Galas, dinners, test-driving cars yet to be launched, concerts, free stuff, expensive wines, delicatessen, tickets to parks, all of it was handled by his secretary because it annoyed him. People used to call offering him a chance to be part of lucrative, already closed deals just to strengthen their relationship with him. I saw it happen. It was during a real estate bubble, but still, he was a silent partner in some shady deals that only concluded after proving lucrative. The mere insinuation of his name made the deal happen, so he made a profit before even investing his money. He complained about all those things a lot while getting richer and richer, just because he was already rich. P.S. Beer, casinos, and telecommunications were his businesses. I worked as a waiter for him and he loved me, which got me into trouble with his son and made me quit. Story 42. I've managed private golf, country, and social/city clubs for more than 2 decades. I've worked with, for, and befriended many of the top 1%. They're just like us. Imagine your favorite, happy-go-lucky, helpful best friend. Now give that friend the means to help anyone in the world. There are many like that. Now imagine that nasty, spiteful bully from your high school or neighborhood who took joy in making others' lives miserable. Now give them all the resources in the world to keep doing that. Yep, I've met them too. What shocks me most? The hypocrisy? The most popular example, they support fervent gun control and open borders but often rely on armed guards and gated communities. I was also shocked by the anti-Semitic attitudes I saw between liberal Jewish people and more Orthodox or conservative Jewish people. At one club I worked at, a lonely wife of an ultra-wealthy man would leave ultra-expensive jewelry behind at the spa, gym, and card room just because she wanted attention. Eventually, one of her RM watches went missing. I suspect I know who took it, and I hope she found a way to pawn it for 10 times her annual average salary. I probably have as many positive, uplifting stories as examples of miserable human beings from my experience. But I will say, I've never come to trust even the nicest ones to pick one of us normal folks over one of their fellow ultra-elite friends. Even if they know a friend or acquaintance is in the wrong, they will never side with the help over one of their own. Story 43. I work for a few of them on high-end acquisitions, mostly classic cars. The guys with 9+ digit wealth go 2 very different ways. 80% of them are down to earth and really nice to be around. Their problems are definitely different from ours, but the self-made ones are super chill. 10% use me purely as a service to save time. They don't even really speak to me. The last 10% treat everyone like staff, and they suck. I charge extra for being treated that way, even if they don't know it. People with high 7 to mid 8-digit net worth are all over the place. You have old money that's super cheap, new money trying to skip the line and get a car that's in demand without paying over sticker. Then you have people like me who daily drive old F-150s because that's how they were raised and they never act outside of those routes. Like everything, people are different. Second-generation wealth can go suck an egg though. Most, if not all, are entitled and spoiled. Story 44. Nothing exciting, just horrible business people driving their 5-generation family company into the ground because they grew up wealthy and refuse to take advice from the experts they hire. They buy or start businesses they know nothing about, wildly overspend or overpay and think they can grow any business because of their self-perceived operational and business expertise. Expertise that supposedly drove the success of other businesses they owned, which in reality got super lucky in a hot market. Then, they pay the people giving them good advice way under market rates, treat them like crap, generally don't believe in COVID, and want them back on planes 4 times a week in September 2020, even when those people have anxiety disorders and aren't ready to get on a bunch of planes and stay in hotels. Story 45. I was a substance abuse counselor in Southeast Asia for almost a decade. I met quite a few billionaires and got through many counseling sessions. I think I've gained a pretty clear picture of the ultra-wealthy and their families. My main takeaway is that they just do not care about the rest of us. It's solely about wealth preservation. I've seen how they treat others, their personal assistants, our support staff, and it was always devoid of any sense of humanity. They only fear a few things, but mainly time. They fear death and the end of their mortal life. More than that, they fear parents, siblings, uncles, or any family member who could take away even a smudge of their wealth. They get away with ending lives as if it's nothing. I spoke with one young man whose father is one of the richest people in Hong Kong. The father ended 2 people, one in a driving accident, and one he shot dead. People were paid off, and nothing came of it. Later in life, I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Freire. In it, he states that not only are the oppressed victims of oppression done by the oppressors, but the oppressors are also victims of the system. Oppressing others robs you of your humanity. I wholeheartedly agree with this statement. Story 46. I have been acquainted with a few billionaires and several multimillionaires, most of them board members of non-profit charities I have worked for. Non-profit organizations in the US must have boards, and the board members are usually wealthy individuals. Sorry to disappoint you, but some of these people were wonderful humans. Yes, some were jerks too, and most were somewhere in between, just like the rest of us. Most genuinely cared about the people these charities were reaching. You could tell by the questions they asked when I gave presentations. I know it's uncool to fail to trash the wealthy, but I found them to be just like the rest of us. Some were total jerks, some were exemplary humans, and most were somewhere in between. Story 47. A friend was selling a new kind of powered pedal boat in Florida and met a billionaire who owned multiple Caribbean resorts. The billionaire took a liking to my buddy, shared drinks and meals many times, and bought a couple dozen boats from him. Once they became friends, the rich guy made my friend a life-changing offer. He offered to set my buddy up as the majority owner of a brand new beachside gift shop, guaranteeing my friend would make a high income for him and his family. The catch? It was money laundering and tax evasion. Pure and simple. My buddy wisely chose not to do it because of his wife's concerns about ending up dead. It turned out the billionaire's resorts were all near airports favored by drug smugglers, and drugs were very, very good business for this outwardly normal-seeming ultra-rich guy. Story 48. When I was just out of high school, I worked as a bellman at a private club in Florida, where membership depended on how many generations your wealth extended, usually at least 3, with very few exceptions. Most of my work involved delivering newspapers and meals. Occasionally, I drove members to the airport or helped bring in groceries. By and large, the people there were very polite and engaging. Some dressed like everyday folks, and some didn't. That being said, there was something fundamentally different about the way they moved and spoke. Almost forgot? Taco wanted to be a member, but they told him to kick rocks. Story 49. I had an extremely wealthy uncle who passed away last year. Houses everywhere, private jets. Yes, jets, plural, boats, cars, and more. He had all this, but generally his vehicles were not flashy. When I was a kid, I got a poster of a Ferrari Testarossa at my school book fair. The next time I saw my uncle, I told him he should get a Ferrari. He said he'd never get one. When I asked why, he said, because it's too flashy. He didn't want to advertise his wealth, because it puts people in danger. I didn't understand what he meant until years later. Around the time he told me that, there was a big story about a Canadian billionaire whose daughter was kidnapped for ransom. They were targeted purely because of their wealth. So, I can only imagine that was what influenced him to say what he did all those years ago. But something else he said that day has stayed with me my entire life. He said, a real rich person doesn't advertise it with a loud, flashy car. He doesn't need to advertise his wealth because he knows he's wealthy and has nothing to prove. Someone who's trying too hard or is insecure needs the flashy car. They have to advertise their money to make themselves feel better. I've seen this just on the streets. Guys with a Ferrari or Bugatti, and someone pulls up next to them in a Mustang or an old Corvette, revving and wanting to race. The Ferrari or Bugatti driver just doesn't take the bait. Why would he? It's obvious his car would smoke them. Who exactly would he be trying to impress? Life is good for a lot of these people, so why act like a wanker? Obviously, there are tons of rich a-holes. I just found my uncle's philosophy on this interesting. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.